The evening was cold, and the streets were filled with people rushing home after a long day. Most walked quickly, their eyes fixed on their phones or the ground ahead, eager to escape the chill in the air. No one noticed the thin figure sitting quietly near the corner of the street. Wrapped in an old torn coat and clutching a small paper cup, the woman blended into the shadows like part of the pavement itself. Her face looked tired, her hair messy, but there was a certain softness. In her eyes, a quiet dignity hidden behind the signs of hardship. The man who would soon change her life almost walked past her too. He was carrying a bag of groceries and thinking about the office party he had to attend later that night. The invitations had gone out weeks ago, and he was expected to show up dressed neatly and ready to network. His life wasn't perfect. His job was stressful, and he often worried about bills, but compared to her, he knew he was fortunate. Something about the way she sat there, shivering slightly in the cold air, made him pause. He hesitated at first. People around him kept walking, pretending not to see her. A few glanced quickly, then looked away. But he couldn't do the same. His conscience told him to stop. Slowly, he walked over and crouched down so he wouldn't tower over her. "Are you okay?" he asked gently. The woman looked up, surprised that someone had actually spoken to her. Her voice was quiet, almost hoarse. "I'm fine," she said. Though it was clear she wasn't, her hands trembled as she held the empty paper cup, which hadn't collected much that day. The man felt a wave of sympathy. He pulled out a sandwich from his grocery bag and handed it to her. At first, she hesitated, but then she accepted it with a small nod. "Thank you," she whispered. The way she spoke those two words carried so much emotion that it touched him deeply. It wasn't just gratitude, it was relief. The kind that comes when someone finally sees you after days of being invisible. They talked for a few minutes. She didn't share much about herself, only that life had been difficult lately. He didn't pry, he simply listened. As he looked at her, he realized she wasn't just a homeless woman as most people would see her. She was a person with stories, with a past, and maybe with dreams that life had stolen from her. When he finally stood up, he glanced at the time. The office party was only an hour away. He thought about the glittering hall, the food, the laughter, and the colleagues who would be there. Then he looked back at her, sitting alone in the cold. Her meal finished quickly, as if she hadn't eaten all day, and that's when the idea came to him. It's an idea that even he couldn't fully explain. "Listen," he said slowly, "there's an office party tonight at my workplace. It's warm inside, there's food, music. Would you like to come?" The woman blinked, confused. No one had ever invited her to something like that before. "Me?" she asked softly, almost in disbelief. "Yes, you," he said with a small smile. "You don't have to stay long. Just, maybe it will be better than sitting out here in the cold." For a moment, she looked down at her hands, unsure. Then, with the faintest of smiles, she nodded. The man helped her to her feet. Though she wore ragged clothes and looked out of place in the busy city crowd, he didn't care. To him, she wasn't a burden or an embarrassment. She was simply a person in need of kindness. And in that chance encounter, on that cold street corner, a story began that no one in the office would ever forget. The walk toward the office building was quiet at first. The man carried his bag of groceries in one hand, while the woman walked beside him, holding her arms close to her chest to keep warm. People passing by gave them curious looks, some whispering, others frowning. But the man ignored them. He didn't care what strangers thought. What mattered was that, for the first time in a long while, this woman didn't have to sit alone on the cold sidewalk as they neared the building. Bright lights from the tall glass doors spilled onto the street. Music and laughter could already be heard faintly from inside. The party had started. The man hesitated for a moment, glancing at the woman. Her clothes were old and torn, her shoes worn out, her hair messy from days of neglect. She looked completely different from the polished, well-dressed crowd he knew would be waiting inside. He worried about how people might react, but then he reminded himself of the reason he had invited her: kindness. He refused to let his fear of judgment stop him. Before they went in, he offered her his scarf. She shook her head at first, embarrassed, but he insisted. "Please," he said gently. "It's warm, and you'll feel a little more comfortable." She finally accepted, wrapping it around her shoulders. It wasn't much, but it softened her appearance slightly, and, more importantly, it made her feel seen as they stepped through. The doors, the warmth of the building washed over them. The grand lobby was decorated with glittering lights, shiny ornaments, and a tall Christmas tree in the corner. The woman's eyes widened slightly as she took it all in. It had been years since she had seen such brightness and celebration up close. For a moment, she almost forgot the cold street behind her. The man guided her toward the party hall. When they entered, the contrast was striking. The room was full of colleagues dressed in elegant suits and sparkling dresses, holding glasses of champagne and laughing in groups. The smell of food filled the air, and soft music played in the background. Almost immediately, heads turned, conversations faltered. People noticed her clothes, her unpolished appearance, the scarf that didn't match the glamour of the event. Whispers started. A few raised their eyebrows. Some gave quick, judgmental looks before turning back to their drinks. The man noticed but stayed calm. He held his head high, walking beside her with confidence. He didn't introduce her right away or explain anything. He simply found a quiet table for them to sit at. Once seated, he went to get food and drinks. He returned with a plate filled with appetizers and a glass of juice for her. She looked down at the food as if she hadn't seen anything so fresh and rich in a long time. "You didn't have to do all this," she said softly, her eyes glistening. He smiled. Sometimes the smallest acts matter the most. "Tonight, you deserve to feel like everyone else here." She ate slowly, savoring each bite. Around them, people still whispered, but she ignored them. Her back straightened, her movements graceful in their own way. Even in her worn clothes, there was something about her presence, a quiet strength, a calm dignity that made her stand out. The man watched her closely. He had expected her to feel uncomfortable, maybe even overwhelmed. But instead, she seemed oddly at peace, as if she belonged there more than anyone realized. Her eyes sparkled under the party lights, and for a brief moment, it looked like she was holding on to a secret the world had forgotten. He didn't know it then, but this act of kindness, this decision to bring her here, was about to uncover a truth that would leave everyone in that hall speechless. The moment the woman stepped into the party hall beside the man, it was as if an invisible wave moved through the room. Laughter that had filled the air a few seconds ago softened into uneasy murmurs. Glasses clinked less often. Conversations slowed. All eyes, whether openly or through discreet side glances, were drawn toward her. She was unlike anyone else in the room. Her coat was worn thin, her shoes scuffed, and her hair was uncombed, falling loosely around her shoulders. In a place filled with polished shoes, expensive perfumes, sparkling dresses, and iron suits, she was an obvious outsider. But it wasn't just her appearance that made people stare, was the mystery. Why was she there? Who had brought her? The man walked with quiet confidence, ignoring the stares. He led her to a small corner table, speaking to her kindly as though nothing was unusual. To him, it wasn't strange. It was an act of humanity. But to everyone else, it was shocking. Whispers began to spread quickly. Two women near the buffet leaned toward each other, their voices low but sharp. "Who is she? Do you know her?" "No," the other replied, frowning. "She doesn't work here. Look at her clothes." At another table, a group of men chuckled under their breath. "Maybe he brought her as a joke," one said. Or maybe he couldn't find a proper date. Another smirked. Their laughter was short and cruel, quickly muffled when they noticed a man glance in their direction. But not everyone was amused. A few looked on with discomfort, shifting awkwardly in their seats. One woman whispered, "It feels wrong to stare. Maybe there's more to her story than we know." Her friend rolled her eyes. "Please, she's probably just someone he picked up to look like a hero." The woman herself seemed unfazed by the attention. She sat quietly, hands folded neatly in her lap, her posture straight despite the whispers surrounding her. When food was brought to her, she thanked the man softly, her voice polite and steady. It was as if she had been in such rooms before, as if she was no stranger to elegant surroundings. Even if her clothes told a different story, that quiet dignity unsettled some people even more. Why does she act like she belongs here? Young employee muttered under his breath, expected her to look nervous, to shrink under the weight of the stares. But instead, she sat calmly, her eyes observant, her movements graceful in a way that didn't match her outward appearance. The office hierarchy, the unspoken rules of appearance. Wealth and reputation was being silently challenged. People didn't know how to respond. Some hid behind laughter. Others hid behind pity. A few simply avoided looking at her at all. The man, however, remained firm. He spoke to her kindly, asked if she was comfortable, and treated her with respect in a way no one else dared to. His actions made some of his colleagues uncomfortable. It wasn't just her presence that unsettled them, was his refusal to be ashamed of it. One colleague approached him briefly, forcing a smile. "Interesting guest you've brought," he said in a low voice, his tone carrying a hint of mockery. The man only replied calmly, "She's a friend. That's all that matters." The colleague gave a tight smile and walked away, but his eyes betrayed his disapproval. Meanwhile, the whispers didn't stop. If anything, they grew louder as more people noticed her. The air was filled with curiosity, judgment, and the faint tension of a story that had not yet revealed itself. Everyone was eager to know who she really was, but no one had the courage to ask. And yet, through all the gossip and stares, the woman remained steady. She didn't lash out. She didn't beg for acceptance. She simply sat there with an expression that was calm, almost regal, as if she was quietly waiting for the moment when the truth would reveal itself. The office thought it was laughing at her. What they didn't realize was that the story was only beginning, and soon it would be they who would sit in shock and shame. The whispers around the hall were impossible to ignore. Every corner of the party seemed to buzz with low voices, muffled laughter, and sideways glances. People tried to hide it, but the truth was clear. Most of them were talking about her. About the woman in ragged clothes who sat quietly in a sea of elegance, but if the woman noticed, she didn't show it. Her posture remained straight, her shoulders relaxed. She didn't fidget nervously, nor did she try to hide her appearance. She sat as though the chair beneath her was a throne, her calmness wrapping around her like a cloak stronger than silk or velvet. Her face carried no trace of embarrassment, only quiet composure. When the man brought her a plate of food, she accepted it with grace. She held the fork carefully, ate slowly, and thanked him softly each time he offered her something. Her tone was polite, warm, but steady like a person used to being respected. Those watching couldn't help but notice the difference. Her clothes might have been old, but her manner was not. At one point, a young employee, emboldened by curiosity, walked near her table. He dropped a sarcastic remark under his breath. "Strange place for charity work, don't you think?" His friends chuckled behind him. The woman looked up at him not with anger, not with shame, but with a calm gaze that held him still. Her eyes, though tired, had a quiet sharpness in them. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. The young man shifted uncomfortably under her gaze and quickly walked away. His laughter cut short. It was that same quiet dignity that began to unsettle others in the room. They expected her to shrink, to appear small and out of place. But instead, she looked like she belonged, not because of what she wore, but because of how she carried herself. Even the little details revealed her poise. When a waiter accidentally brushed past her chair, she smiled warmly and said, "Thank you," as though he had done her a kindness. When she finished her drink, she placed the glass neatly on the table, careful not to disturb the tablecloth. She moved with thoughtfulness and precision, the kind of subtle manners that people with privilege are often taught from childhood. The man who had invited her noticed too. As he sat beside her, he felt an odd sense of surprise. When he first saw her on the street, he had seen only hardship: her ragged coat, her hungry eyes, her shivering hands. But now, sitting under the soft glow of the party lights, she seemed different, almost familiar. There was a confidence about her, quiet but undeniable, that made him wonder if her story was far bigger than what met the eye. Some colleagues began whispering in a different tone now. One woman murmured, "She doesn't act like she's poor." Another added, "It's almost like she's used to this kind of place." The judgment was still there, but it was tinged with curiosity now. The mystery around her was growing. Through it all, the woman never raised her voice, never snapped back, never showed irritation. Instead, she sat in quiet strength, like someone who had learned long ago that storms pass if you remain still. Her presence itself was unsettling to those who had mocked her, because they realized she wasn't rattled by their shallow opinions. She wasn't seeking their approval, she didn't need it. The man leaned closer to her and said softly, "You're handling this better than anyone else here." She smiled faintly, her eyes glinting with something he couldn't quite understand. "People reveal themselves when they think no one is watching," she replied. "Tonight, you've seen who they really are." Her words struck him, lingering in his mind. There was wisdom in her voice, the kind that didn't come from books, but from experience. She wasn't just a woman struggling on the streets. She was someone who had lived, endured, and learned more than most of the people in the room ever would. As the music played and the laughter resumed around the hall, the woman sat calmly in her corner, her demeanor unshaken. Those who had mocked her began to avoid her gaze, unsettled by the quiet strength she carried. Others, curious and unsure, kept watching her, sensing that there was more to her than anyone yet realized. And indeed, there was. For soon, the truth about her identity would unravel, and the same colleagues who whispered about her would find themselves stunned into silence. The party was in full swing now. Music played softly, glasses clinked, and laughter rose here and there, though the whispers about the mysterious woman hadn't truly died down. People tried to return to their conversations, but curiosity lingered. Every so often, someone's eyes drifted back toward the corner table where she sat with the man who had brought her. And then the doors opened. The moment was subtle at first, but it carried a power that swept across the room like a silent wave. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. Laughter faded into quiet. Even the music, though still playing, seemed suddenly distant. All eyes turned to the entrance where the CEO had just walked in. He was a man of presence, tall, dressed in a perfectly tailored suit, his expression calm but commanding. Everyone in the company respected him. Some admired him, others feared him, but all understood one thing: he was the highest authority in the building. When he entered a room, people noticed. Employees rushed forward to greet him. "Good evening, sir. So glad you could make it." Smiles spread across faces. Hands were extended and heads bowed slightly in subtle respect. He gave polite nods, shaking a few hands, but his attention seemed elsewhere. His eyes were searching, scanning the crowd as though looking for something or someone, The woman in the corner noticed immediately. Her body stiffened for the first time that night. She lowered her gaze, her hands folding neatly in her lap. The man beside her looked at her curiously. He had seen her calmness all evening, her quiet dignity, her steady composure. But now, for the first time, there was a flicker of change in her demeanor, something hidden beneath the surface. Something he couldn't yet understand. The CEO stepped further into the hall, his polished shoes clicking softly against the floor. People moved aside instinctively, creating a path for him without needing to be told. His eyes moved slowly over the groups of employees, past the tables of food, past the groups chatting near the bar. Then, suddenly, his steps faltered. He had seen her. The room felt it instantly. His expression changed just slightly, but enough to send a ripple through the crowd. His eyes, once scanning indifferently, now locked on the woman sitting quietly. In the corner, he didn't blink. He didn't look away. The whispers began again, this time louder, more urgent. Why is he looking at her? Does he know her? This is strange. Really strange. The CEO's pace quickened, his footsteps firmer now. He ignored the greeting still being offered to him, brushing past employees who had been eager to shake his hand. His focus was absolute. He walked straight toward the woman, his presence filling the room like a storm gathering force. The man who had invited her looked around nervously. He could feel the eyes of the entire room drilling. Into them, he leaned toward her and whispered, "Do you know him?" But she said nothing. Her lips pressed into a thin line, her gaze lowered, her composure just barely holding dot, and then he was there. The CEO stopped directly in front of her table. The room had fallen silent, now so silent that the hum of the lights above could be heard. The music still played, but no one listened. Every eye was fixed on the scene before them. The CEO's face softened as he looked at her. His voice, when it came, was quiet, but full of emotion. "What are you doing here?" he asked, not in anger, but in disbelief. Gasps spread across the room. People leaned closer, straining to hear. The woman finally lifted her gaze. Her eyes met his, and for the first time all evening, her calm demeanor cracked not with shame, but with recognition. "Hello," she said softly, her voice carrying just enough for those nearby to hear. The CEO took a step closer. His hands trembled slightly as he reached toward her, as though confirming with his own touch that she was real, that she was standing before him. And then, without hesitation, he pulled her into an embrace. The room erupted in shock. Employees froze, jaws dropping, eyes wide. Whispers turned into exclamations. Did he just hug her? No way. Who is she? And then came the words that silenced everything again. "This is my wife," the CEO said firmly, his arms still wrapped around her as though he had found something precious that had been lost. The silence that followed was heavier than anything. Before, people stared, speechless. The woman they had mocked, pitied, and judged only moments ago was not a stranger. She was not an outsider. She was the wife of the most powerful man in the company, and now everything they thought they knew about her and about themselves was about to be shattered. Asterisk. The CEO's words hung in the air like thunder after lightning. "This is my wife." The room froze. The sound of laughter, the clinking of glasses, the background music, all of it seemed to fade into silence. Dozens of eyes stared at the woman in disbelief. The whispers that had circled the room earlier turned into stunned gasps. Colleagues who had mocked her clothes and whispered cruel jokes now sat rigid, their faces pale, as if the ground beneath them had shifted. The woman sat quietly, still wrapped in her husband's embrace, her eyes lowered, but calm. The man who had invited her blinked in shock, his mind racing to make sense of what he had just heard. The homeless woman he had shown kindness to, the one he had offered food and an invitation out of compassion, was not a stranger to power at all. She was the wife of the most powerful man in the company. The CEO slowly released her from his arms and looked at the room. His expression grave. His voice carried authority, but it also trembled with emotion. You see her as someone in rags. You see her as someone beneath you. But she is my wife, the woman who has stood beside me through everything. A wave of disbelief spread across the crowd. Some employees glanced nervously at one another, their whispers betraying their shame. I can't believe it. We were laughing at her, his wife. How is that possible? The CEO continued, his eyes moving across the room, meeting the gaze of those who had judged her. What you don't know is that she chose to live differently for a time. She wanted to step away from the wealth and the comforts, to see life from another side. She wanted to understand struggle, to feel what so many go through every day. I respected her choice, though I worried for her safety. And tonight, I see how that choice has revealed the truth, not about her, but about all of you. The silence was deafening. Every person in the room could feel the weight of his words pressing down on them. Their polished shoes, their glittering jewelry, their fancy clothes suddenly felt like costumes hiding their smallness. They had laughed, they had whispered. They had judged without mercy. The woman, meanwhile, spoke for the first time with her full voice. It was calm, steady, but filled with meaning. I came here tonight not to embarrass anyone. I came only because one man had the kindness to see me as human when so many others passed me by. He didn't care what I wore or how I looked. He simply cared. She turned her head slightly toward the man who had invited her, her lips curving into a faint but sincere smile. The man felt his chest tighten. He hadn't done it for praise or recognition. He had only wanted to show kindness. And yet, in that moment, surrounded by the shocked faces of his colleagues, he realized just how much that simple choice mattered. The CEO placed a hand gently on his wife's shoulder. His eyes softened as he looked at her. You have always been stronger than me, he said quietly, though the room could hear every word. You never needed luxury to define you. Tonight, I am proud that your strength has revealed the truth about kindness and the truth about those who lack it. Employees shifted uneasily. Some lowered their eyes, ashamed of their whispers. Others fidgeted with their glasses or plates, unable to meet the gaze of either the CEO or his wife. The power dynamic in the room had flipped completely. The woman they had dismissed as unworthy now stood at the very center of their world, her calm dignity towering above their shallow judgments. The atmosphere was heavy, but it carried something else, now respect. Not forced respect for wealth or authority, but genuine respect for the quiet strength of a woman who had endured their stares without flinching. The woman glanced around the room. Her eyes were neither cold nor accusing, but thoughtful. You should remember, she said softly, that every person has a story. You may not see it, you may not understand it, but it is there. And when you judge based only on what you see, you reveal more about yourself than about them. Her words lingered in the air like a lesson etched into stone. No one dared to respond. No one dared to laugh anymore. The truth was undeniable. And it had left the room stunned into silence. The man who had invited her felt something shift deep inside him too. He realized that his small act of kindness had not only changed her evening, but had also sparked a revelation that would stay with everyone present. The CEO turned once more to the man and said firmly, "Thank you. Tonight, you reminded me what true decency looks like." The words, coming from the highest authority in the company, echoed across the hall, leaving the man humbled and speechless. The recognition was shocking. Yes, but it was more than that. It was transformative. In that single moment, everyone in the room was forced to confront the truth about their own hearts. And none of them would leave the party the same as they had entered. "This is my wife." Those 4 words had cracked the polished surface of the entire office like a stone-shattering glass. The atmosphere in the party hall was no longer festive. It was heavy, suffocating. Every pair of eyes flickered nervously. Every whisper that had filled the room earlier now, replaced with stunned silence. The colleagues who had mocked her clothing only minutes before were the first to feel the sting of shame. They remembered their laughter, their cruel remarks disguised as jokes, and now those words echoed back at them, sounding uglier than ever. One woman who had been whispering at the buffet table suddenly couldn't meet anyone's eyes. She held her glass tightly, her knuckles white, wishing she could melt into the floor at the far side of the hall. 2 men who had chuckled about the man bringing charity to the party stared at each other in disbelief. Their earlier confidence drained from their faces. Their smirks had vanished, replaced with pale expressions of regret. One muttered under his breath, We actually laughed at the CEO's wife." The other shook his head slowly, unable to find words. The younger employees who had giggled behind their hands now sat stiff and quiet, their eyes darting toward the woman, but quickly looking away when she met their gaze. They were terrified of what this revelation meant, not just for their reputations, but for what it revealed about who they were inside. The woman herself remained calm, her face serene, her posture still straight. She didn't gloat, didn't scold, didn't demand apologies. She simply sat there, composed, as if she had already forgiven the room. That calmness, that quiet strength, only deepened the shame of those who had judged her. The CEO, however, did not let the silence slip away without meaning. His eyes swept across the room, scanning the faces of his employees. He saw the guilt, the unease, the lowered gazes. And his voice, steady but sharp, broke the silence. "Tonight," he said firmly, "I have seen the true face of my company, not in numbers, not in profits, not in reports, but in character. And I am disappointed." The words cut deeper than any reprimand ever could. Several people shifted uncomfortably, their shoes scraping against the floor. One man coughed nervously. Another lowered his head completely. The room felt colder, despite the glowing lights and warm decorations. The CEO's wife looked around, her eyes soft but piercing. "I do not need apologies," she said gently. "But I hope you remember this feeling the next time you are tempted to laugh at someone you believe is beneath you. Not everyone will have someone to stand up for them like I do tonight. Sometimes your kindness or your cruelty may be the only thing that person receives all day." Her words landed like gentle arrows, piercing without drawing blood, but leaving their mark forever. No one dared to respond. No one dared to argue. For the first time all evening, the office workers felt small, not because of her rags, but because of their own pettiness. The man who had invited her sat in quiet astonishment. Around him, people were ashamed, but he felt proud, not for himself, but for her. She had faced judgment with dignity and grace, and now the entire room stood humbled in front of her. One by one, people began to approach hesitantly. A woman from accounting stepped forward, her voice trembling. I'm sorry," she whispered, though she didn't know if the apology was enough. A young man followed, muttering, "I shouldn't have judged." Their words stumbled out awkwardly, but the sincerity was clear. The woman listened politely, nodding slightly, but she didn't revel in their apologies. She didn't need them. Her lesson had already been delivered. Meanwhile, others simply sat in silence, too ashamed to speak. The weight of their guilt pressed down on them harder than any words could. They knew they had failed, not as employees, not as professionals, but as human beings. The CEO spoke again, his tone final. Respect is not measured by wealth, nor is dignity measured by clothing. Tonight, my wife has taught you something I could never put in a company policy. Remember it? Let this change you. Heads nodded slowly around the room. No one clapped, no one cheered. It wasn't that kind of moment. It was deeper, heavier, the kind of moment that would live in their memories long after the decorations of the party were taken down, and in that silence, a new kind of respect filled the air, not forced, not out of fear of the CEO, but out of genuine recognition for the quiet woman who had endured their judgment with unshakable calm. The office was in shock? Yes. But beneath that shock was something stronger. The beginning of change. Asterisk. The party hall no longer felt like a place of celebration. The decorations still sparkled, the music still played faintly, and the tables were still lined with food, but the atmosphere had transformed completely. What had started as a festive gathering was now a moment of reckoning. The employees sat in silence, the weight of shame and reflection pressing down on them like an invisible force. The CEO's wife remained seated, her posture straight, her face calm. She didn't need to scold anyone. Her presence alone had already delivered the lesson. But she understood the importance of speaking, of leaving words that would stay with them long after this night ended. She rose slowly to her feet. Her old worn coat looked out of place under the golden chandeliers, but the way she carried herself made her appear taller than anyone else in the room. She looked around, her eyes meeting those who had laughed, mocked, or whispered about her earlier. Not with anger, never with anger, but with a quiet strength that made them lower their gaze. In this room tonight, she began, her voice soft but steady. I was judged before I even spoke a word. Some of you saw my clothes, my face, my shoes. You thought you knew my story. To you, I was invisible, unworthy, an outsider. She paused. The silence deepened, the employees hanging on to every word. But one man here saw differently. He saw not a beggar, not a burden, but a person. He offered kindness when no one else did. And that kindness, she turned her head slightly toward the man who had invited her, has reminded me of something precious, that true humanity still exists, even in a world that often forgets it. The man shifted awkwardly in his seat, embarrassed by the attention. He had never wanted praise. But the words filled his heart with a warmth he couldn't describe. The CEO stepped forward, his voice firm and resonant. My wife's choice to live humbly was her own. She wanted to understand what so many people go through to see the world without the shield of wealth. And tonight, she has revealed something I could never teach you with rules or handbooks. The true meaning of respect. His gaze swept across the room, piercing each face. Respect is not earned by money. It is not measured by expensive clothes or titles. Respect is the way you treat someone who cannot give you anything in return. And tonight, many of you failed that test. The employees shifted uneasily. Some looked down at the floor. Others wrung their hands nervously. No one dared to interrupt. The wife's eyes softened. She spoke again, more gently this time. I don't stand here to humiliate you. I stand here to remind you. The next time you see someone who looks broken, tired, or poor, remember me. Remember this night. Remember how quickly you judged and how wrong you were. Choose kindness first, to cost nothing, but it can mean everything. Her words sank into the hearts of those listening. For the first time, they weren't just ashamed. They were changed. The lesson was too powerful to ignore. The CEO looked at the man who had invited her. His voice softened. And you reminded me of what true decency looks like. While others judged, you acted. You gave without expecting anything. In return, that is the character I hope every person in this company will learn to live by. The man's throat tightened. He didn't know what to say, so he simply nodded, humbled beyond words. Around the room, employees began to realize that this party would be remembered forever, not for the decorations, not for the speeches, not for the food or music. It would be remembered for the lesson. A lesson they had learned not from their CEO's wealth or authority, but from the quiet dignity of a woman they had once dismissed. Slowly, one by one, people began to approach. Her they didn't come with excuses or long speeches, only quiet apologies, soft acknowledgments, or silent nods of respect. And each time, she responded with the same gentle smile. A smile that forgave without words. The party, once filled with shallow chatter, now carried a different energy. It wasn't festive laughter anymore, was reflection. It was humility. It was the quiet understanding that they had been given a second chance to change the way they saw the world as the night came to an end. The CEO and his wife walked toward the exit together. She still wore her old coat, her steps steady, her head held high. The man who had invited her watched them leave, knowing he had witnessed something extraordinary, something that would live in his memory forever. When the doors closed behind them, the room exhaled collectively. Everyone knew they would never look at a stranger the same way again. The story of that night would spread beyond the walls of the company, whispered in homes, retold in conversations, remembered in moments when kindness seemed difficult. And the final lesson was clear: wealth and status can build walls, but kindness breaks them down. Respect is not about what you see on the surface, but about recognizing the humanity in every person you meet. That night, the office party became more than a gathering. It became a turning point. A reminder that true greatness is not in what you own, but in how you treat those the world ignores. The night of the party ended, but its echoes carried far beyond the decorated hall. In the days that followed, the story spread quietly through the company like fire through dry grass. Employees who had been there could not keep it to themselves. They shared it with colleagues, friends, and even family members. The details varied depending on who told it, but the heart of it never changed. A destitute-looking woman walked into the company party. People whispered, mocked, and judged her. Then the CEO revealed the truth. She was his wife. The moment had stunned everyone, but the impact grew stronger as time passed. For the employees who had been there, the shame lingered. They replayed the night in their minds over and over again, the whispers, the laughter, the mocking comments each time. The weight of regret pressed heavier on their hearts. Some even lost sleep, realizing how easily they had judged, how quickly they had exposed the smallness of their character. And yet, there was something else too. Change. People began to carry themselves differently at work. The shallow gossip that once filled the office kitchen grew quieter. The habit of mocking others for their looks, clothes, or mistakes slowly faded. A new awareness grew in the workplace, an invisible reminder that dignity doesn't wear labels, and that anyone could be more than what they appear to be on the surface. The man who had shown kindness became a quiet hero among his peers. He didn't boast about it, nor did he seek recognition. In fact, he blushed whenever someone brought it up. But colleagues looked at him with newfound respect. His act of kindness had set the stage for the revelation, and without him, the lesson might never have unfolded. He became a living reminder that one small decision to stop, to see, to help can spark something far greater than expected. The CEO himself seemed changed too. Though he had always been respected, his speech that night revealed a side many had never seen: vulnerable, emotional, deeply human. In meetings that followed, he emphasized not just performance and results, but also compassion and respect. A company, he said in one address, is not only measured by what it builds or sells. It is measured by how it treats the people it touches inside and outside its walls. His words carried more weight now because everyone remembered the night when his wife had exposed their hearts, and the woman his wife became something of a legend. She did not return to the office often, nor did she seek attention, but her story remained alive in the building. For many employees, the image of her sitting calmly under the glow of chandeliers in her old coat was burned into memory forever. They remembered how she never flinched under their stares, how she forgave with her eyes before they even apologized, how she stood taller in her humility than anyone in their luxury. Outside the company, whispers of the story began to spread. 2. Family members told it at dinner tables. Friends retold it over coffee. The story became a lesson, a parable almost, of kindness, humility, and the danger of judging others too quickly. Never judge a book by its cover, people would say. And then retell the night when an entire company learned that lesson the hard way. Weeks later, the man who had first invited her found himself thinking about her often. He replayed their first encounter on the street the cold night, her trembling hands, her quiet thank you when he gave her food. It humbled him deeply to realize how close he had been to walking past her like everyone else did. Had taken even one more step forward that night, everything would have been different. It taught him something he would never forget. Opportunities for kindness are small doors, and you never know what worlds they open until you step through them. For the employees, the lasting impact was more personal. Some began volunteering at shelters. Others made it a point to speak more kindly, to stop mocking those who seemed different, to offer help where they once would have walked away. Slowly, the culture of the office changed. The lesson of that night did not stay trapped within four walls. It grew into actions, choices, and transformations. And so, while the party was only one night, the impact was timeless. It became a story of humility, humanity, and redemption. A story that would be told again and again, not because of the glamour of the evening, but because of the unforgettable truth it revealed. Kindness can change everything. Judgment can ruin everything, and respect is owed to all, no matter how they appear. That was the lasting impact, the true ending of a story that began on a cold street corner with one simple act of kindness.